he passed away in 1975. Where were you and how were you impacted?
Knowing that, we're a brotherhood was crushing.
Okay, I just want to welcome our audience here to Spokane, Washington. Our podcast, second podcast on footprints of running in Spokane, Washington. And boy, in November, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of University of Oregon's national championship. We had 33% of that team in this room. I was part of that, and Randy James of Ferris High School. Speaking of Ferris, what a school, distance running, history. It's iconic. It's a reason why I came to Spokane, to be honest with you. It wasn't just Ferris, but, Jerry Lindgren and our guest that we have today, a graduate of Ferris 1966, Rick Riley. I know a lot of people know that name, but if you're a young runner, maybe you don't. And you're going to, after this podcast, you're going to know that name and you're going to be inspired. And so I think maybe the best way to start this is just introduce Rick and have Rick tell us a little bit about his life, how he ended up in Spokane, and how he got into running. So I'm going to throw the mic to you.
As a kid, growing up, I lived about as far north as you could possibly live in the state of Washington. My family lived in Ferry County, near Curlew, Washington, which is a town of about 100 people. My grandfather operated a logging company and a lumber mill, and they also had hay fields. And I grew up in this little tiny environment. My dad's family were homesteaders up there. They came up in the early part of the 20th century, and actually the 19th century, I guess. They came up in about 1915 and homesteaded. And I pretty much was not a great athlete in the sense of the type of sports we had up there. I mean, you played basketball or you played baseball, and that was all you had. But I did know I could run. I mean, I ran all over the place. And we moved down here when I was 13 years old. My dad he had served in World War II in the South Pacific, and in about 1953, got a job at the U.S. Air Force at a little radar base up there as a painter. And they deactivated, that was a series of bases they had during the Cold War, and across the upper tier of the U.S. I mean, they stretched, it was called the Inner Dew Line, which meant distant early warning. And supposedly, if we were going to get bombed by the Russians, we were going to be the last line of defense. But I'm not sure that would have worked out. Anyway, Dad moved down here. My mom and dad moved down here when I was 13 years old. My dad worked at Fairchild Air Force Base for 35 years. He ended up retiring as a supervisor of the paint shop. And I ran a tiny bit at Salk Junior High School as a sprinter. Wasn't really very successful. Ended up quitting. And probably quitting is not the right term. Kind of got into an altercation with another kid and got kicked off the team. That kid happened to be Rich Mesmer, who was the best 880-yard runner in the country my senior year. Another one of the great kids that came out of Spokane, but kind of a weird kind of deal. Anyway, we moved up on the South Hill. I ran at Sacagawea Junior High School in the spring of my freshman year. Ran the half mile, ran 2:12, finished third in the All-City. And went up north during the summer to work bucking bales, hauling bales out of the hay fields, putting them in the barn, which is terrifically hard work, and ran when I was up there. So I came into cross country at Ferris, which is a brand new school. That was the fall of 1963, and Ferris had just opened its doors. The sophomore class was like the senior class. There were sophomores, and then the next year there were sophomores and freshmen, and then juniors, sophomores and freshmen, et cetera, et cetera. I was the first graduating class at Ferris High School. Ran cross country that fall, and we were not allowed to run varsity. We could only run JV or B squad, and I was undefeated in cross country. Never lost a race. Won everything I ran. In the spring, kind of the same thing. And in that summer between my sophomore and junior years where I really caught the running bug, and that was 1964. And of course, 1964 was Lindgren's big year. When he made the Olympic team, set a national high school record for a mile. And I remember vividly going down to Pullman and watching Jerry run 4:06 flat. And I mean, I'm not sounding like I was arrogant, but I was a confident kid. And I saw him run that, and I said, if this guy can do this, I could do this. I know I can do this. And so I started putting in the miles, ran a 4:23 mile that summer, ended up second in the state cross country championships, got beat by a guy that I had no idea who he was, that he ever existed. And that guy was Roscoe Devine from Columbia River, who was the great miler at Oregon, who I ran against over and over and over. I mean, he was the guy that, he was fantastic. But after that cross country loss, I never lost a race in high school after that. That was the last race I ever lost. And literally within 2 years of me starting to run, I'd run a 4:11 mile. But what is interesting about that is that nobody ever said the word talent. Nobody said, hey, this kid's pretty good. The point of reference in Spokane was Jerry Lindgren, who, he's run a 4:01 mile in high school. He makes the Olympic team. He runs 8:40 for 2 miles indoors. He runs 13:44 for 5K. You just felt like you're pretty good, but the gold standard was Lindgren. And, I continued to really run hard in the summer. After I won the state cross country championships, my coach, Herm Cavan, well, actually I had two coaches, but Tony Dolphin, the late Tony Dolphin, was my cross country coach. He was really a great man. And Herm Cavanis was my track coach. So I had a bit of a balance. Tony was a quiet, just, instilled confidence in you in just a quiet sort of way. Herm was like the rah, rah, rah guy. We got to get after it. One of his favorite sayings was like, never lose a chance to run, or, hustle, 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 hustle every chance you get, stuff like that. And just a whole different kind of, he and I really hit it off because not only, was he my coach, we camped together, we fished together, we hunted together. He was like a second father. And so he sat me down after cross country and he said to me, you can be the best runner in the state of Washington. You already are. You've done that. But if you want to be the best runner in this country, this is what you have to do. And I literally went out that night and ran about 22 miles. And I'm serious, I did that. And in the course of the following months, in the wintertime of 65 and 66, I ran over 1,000 miles. I was undefeated indoors, high school. I ran a 4:11 mile indoors. I set a goal, and this is one of the favorite stories I tell the kids that I coach. I shared my brother and I, my younger brother Tim, who also became a state champion. We shared bunk beds, and on the bunk slats, the boards underneath, and I got the bottom bunk. He was a young guy; he got the top bunk. On the boards where I'd lay every night and look up, I wrote goal for 2 miles, 8:48, and the interesting thing about that whole thing is in the state meet at Pullman, I ran 8:48. And I tell the kids, I wish I'd written down 8:38, because I really feel like if you set your mind to do something and you're willing to work hard, you can do that. I mean, I'm not sure I could have run 8:38, but certainly putting that positive thought and then being willing to work hard, that positive affirmation was a big step to running that. But that whole spring was just a series of fast races. I ran 4:08.5, which is still the City League record for the mile. I mean, and that's 1966. I ran 9 minutes and 1/10 at Pasco, which is still the Pasco meet record. I ran 8:57 in the City League. I ran the 8:48. All of those, of course, I ran on dirt or cinder tracks. The only time I ever ran on an all-weather track as a high schooler was in San Diego, and I ran a 4:04 mile on that track. But the Pullman race, the state meet, the 2 mile where I set the national high school record, the whole target for that was to break 8:50. And my coach and I sat down and we said, okay, here's what we need to do. You need to get by the mile in 4:20. We got to hit about a 4:20, maybe 4:22, and then we got to see what you have left. Well, I was so jacked up for this race and so excited. I mean, and I know my exact split, so I'm going to give it to you. But I went through the first quarter in 60.5. I mean, that's what you should be running for a mile. 60.5. I hit the half mile in 2:04. And I remember thinking when I heard that split, I said, man, I feel good. This is easy. I go by in 2:04, 3:12, 4:20, which actually would at the time have broken Seattle's city record for the mile. And then just sort of settled into 68s. I hit, as is the case, I started to get tired in the 7th lap. I ran a 71-second 7th lap. And when I heard the split, I said, I can break 8:50. And I remember coming around the final curve, and I looked up at the clock. I could see the clock as I hit the point of the curve, and it said 8:32. And I said, man, I'm going to be way under. And, of course, I ran 8:48. But, I won by 31 seconds. I nearly lapped Don Cardong. He used to laugh and say, I did everything I could to keep you from lapping me. It was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime races that everything was clicking. The weather was about 70 degrees. There was no wind. I never had any issue running a Pullman, although Pullman's a tough place to run. I'll say that. Later on in college, I found out that Pullman's a tough place to run. I ran 14 minutes for 5K a week later on the track at Compton. I got 4th in that one.
Was that like the number 2 time in the country for a high school kid?
Yeah, that was Jerry had run 13:44, and I ran 14 minutes and 2/10. That time is still the number 10 time of all time. It still stands right along with, of course, ran faster. Craig Virgin ran faster. Maybe Rudy Chapa, a few of those guys, all-time guys. These are the best of the best, I'm proud to say that I'm still in that top 10 tier because, 5K is a man's race. I went by 13 and 3 at 3 miles, 13:35, finished in 58. So there was more left in the tank. I'm confident I probably could have run 13:51, 13:52, but I didn't. That was the only chance I had at it. Went back to New York, and it was kind of because Jerry was such a great 10,000 guy, I put in all kinds of miles. We all kind of trained that way, And so the thought was the easiest way to make the national team is to run a 6 mile. Well, I'd never run one before. It's a hell of a hard race. It was 85 degree heat. It was 80 degree humidity. It was horrifying.
Where in New York was that at?
Randall's Island.
Okay, Randall's Island.
Randall's Island. I ended I was 5th in that race. I was the 4th American. Tracy Smith beat Billy Mills. Tracy ran about 28 flat. So it was Tracy, then Billy Mills. John Lawson was not too far ahead of me. He was a collegiate champion. Dave Ellis, the Canadian champion, was just a few steps ahead of me, and then I was fifth. So, it was one of those things where you just tell me what to run, I'll run it. I can make it work. And I'd done the training. It wasn't that I hadn't done the training. I put in all kinds of miles up, running the hills, out at the Palouse, up Tower Mountain. Maybe my saving grace is we did not have a track. I ran all of my interval work on grass, ran lots of volume interval work. Didn't really do speed work per se because you just can't run that fast on it. And, I did run a 404 mile that year, which at the time was I think number 6 or 7 of all time. But I pretty much, I always felt like my mile time was not a very good indication of what I probably could have done because I really had a lot better speed than that. I ran 155 for 880. It's a 154 800. And I only ran that twice in high school. I just didn't run the race. But, did more slow, longer intervals. Really didn't have an opportunity to run fast because there just wasn't, you just couldn't do it. Never ran the spikes in training, always ran in flats. One of my training runs, I ran 11, we ran out the Palouse Highway, and one of Herm's workouts is to see how far you could run in an hour. And I ran 11.5 miles in an hour out those hills. Probably could have ran a pretty decent marathon. Probably could have. Went to Washington State, went through a series of injuries. What I learned from my college experience was, even though I was the best high school kid around, the guys that I trained with were men. I was 18, they're 22. Even though they had not run the kind of times I had run, their ability to recover was greater. I think they liked to challenge me, kind of got hammered every workout, and started to come down with some injuries, which I was really on track at the end of my sophomore year. I kind of put all the injuries behind me, had run some good, I won the duel against Stanford. Kind of was second all to Lindgren in all of his races in his, that was his senior year, and just in a really freak accident thing, sprained my ankle about 5 weeks before the Nationals. Very, very badly sprained.
And this is your freshman year?
Sophomore year. We couldn't run as freshmen.
That's right.
We were ineligible as freshmen, and I had a decent. We didn't really have very many meets. I ran a few open meets in the summer right after my freshman year in an AAU meet over in Seattle in a space of about 4 hours. I ran a mile in 406, beat Dave Roberts, who was a 401 miler from the U, and turned around a little bit later and ran a 13:35 3 mile. I was in top shape then. I was in that particular time frame. I think in the right race could have broken 4 minutes. Certainly could have run 13:10 for 3 miles. I was ready to go. And as I got into my sophomore year, I had plantar fasciitis, which kind of overcame that, and was starting to get healthy when I sprained my ankle. Ran the 10,000 in the Nationals, the NCAA championships at Berkeley, and I finished 8th, which was a non-scoring position. And we lost to USC by 1 point.
And today, 8th would be 1 point. But that's today.
That's today. And I really, that was my low. That was my bottom as a runner. I went up north again. I didn't run all summer. I questioned whether I still wanted to do this. I was so disappointed. I was just shattered that I'd worked so hard, and accidents happen. But I really was hard on myself as a runner. I beat myself up so bad when I ran a bad race. I was just, I couldn't get over it. And kind of started the road back, had a decent, not great, but okay cross-country season, got my tonsils out, and my junior year, everything clicked. Ran 8:45 for 2 miles, beat everybody but the Oregon guys, and they beat me. They beat me in a duel, one of my worst stupidly run races that I've ever run. That, I've only got a couple of races that haunt me, and that's one of them.
Was Roscoe Devine part of that?
No, Arnie.
Oh,
Arnie and Norm Treerise. Arnie Qualheim and Norm Treerise. I went out blazing in the wind at WSU, and they just kind of caught up with me and ate me alive. And I was like, damn, I learned my lesson in that one. Ran a PR for a mile that year and ended up second in the Nationals in the 6 mile to Frank Shorter. No one had ever heard of Frank. He was sort of a non-entity at Yale, and we were running in Knoxville, another one of those hot, humid, ridiculous places to run in Tennessee. I mean, you've been in Tennessee, you know how terrible that is when it's warm. And I was right at the front of the pack. Frank was kind of running right beside me, and Oscar Moore from Southern Illinois, who was an Olympian, took off. I mean, he got about a 100-meter lead on us, and I started to go after him, and Frank goes, "Oh, don't go, he'll come back." I was like, that sounds like sensible advice. Okay. So, I just fall in with Frank, and we catch him, and somewhere in that process, Frank gets away from me and wins the race. And, but I felt like I'd run about as hard as I could run. I mean, I was not used to that kind of humidity, and, that set the stage for my senior year, where I had an awesome season. I was a Pac 8 champion. I broke 4 minutes. First Cougar to break 4 minutes for a mile. Roscoe had beaten me a couple of times previous, and it was races where I'd led. And to be honest, I kind of said, I'm probably setting myself up, but damn it, I'd rather be out-kicked in 4:01 or 4:02 than lose in 4:06, because I knew it was going to happen. I knew he was going to follow me. I knew exactly what was going to happen. And in the dual meet at Oregon that spring, I led. Crummy, not a great day at Eugene, but I ran 60, 62, 304, ran a 58 last lap, ran 402. Roscoe was a second ahead of me, ran 401. In the Northern Division, he won that as well, and that was even a more tactical race. So the plan leading into the Pac 8 championships, which was at UCLA, also another hot day, was at all costs do not lead. I mean, Jack Mewberry was a fantastic coach. Same old school guy like Bill Bowerman, quiet, kind of distinguished sort of guy. And he said, "Look, you got lots of speed. I don't know why you think you need to go out there and lead these things, And it was kind of modeling after Lindgren, which, I learned my lesson slowly. And I said, "Okay, that's fine. You tell me to stay back, I'll stay back." And we went through. I was about 63 at the quarter split, and the next that's my phone. The next split was we picked the pace up. I was about 202 for 880, 202.6 or something like that. Stayed at about the same split. We went through in about 60 at 1320, 1200. But the difference in that race is Clifton West from Cal was leading at the quarter, and then Mike Mullins from UCLA took over and picked up the pace. When we came around with about 500 to go, Roscoe took off, and Duncan McDonald from Stanford went after him, and I really got bumped hard. I got knocked off stride at that point. And I remember chasing those guys, and when we were going down the backstretch, to this day, I still vividly remember as we were going down the backstretch, I was running flat out. I thought, I'm running top speed. I am not gaining an inch, and I am running flat out. I wasn't tying up. Everything was clicking. And when we came around the curve, all of a sudden I could see I'm gaining on these guys. They're coming back to me. And when we straightened out for home, I pulled up on the inside, and at that moment, Duncan faded out a little bit. He kind of just started to fade out, and I shot through that gap, and I caught Roscoe with about 25 meters to go and nipped him at the tape. I had no idea it was under 4, and I wasn't even thinking. I just knew I'd won.
Were you the first Washingtonian to break 4?
No, Roscoe was.
Oh, that's right.
Roscoe broke 4 minutes as a freshman. I was the second.
So you're the second Washington high school graduate to break 4 minutes.
Yes, and the first Cougar. That was, a school record. Broke my own school record. I'd run 4:02 against the duel against the Huskies, but it was right around the 30th fastest time
on Earth.
On Earth, yeah. For a while, that was the best mile on the planet, so I was the best miler in the world for a couple 3 weeks. It was, to tell you the truth, of all the races I've run, from the time I started out running, my goal was to be a sub 4 minute miler, and I couldn't believe it. Literally, it was really crazy that the realization just had not sunk in on me. And one of the highlights of that whole thing, we were at the airport, and Bill Bowerman came up and shook hands with me, and I thought, that's a pretty big deal, man. Bill congratulated me. Wow. And when I got home, crazily enough, and the headlines are in the Spokesman Review, I believed that I had actually done this thing. And, it was the only sub 4 minute mile I've ever run. I ran 4:01 indoors. I certainly was capable of doing it. I just was never in the race that it seemed to where it would work. And ran in the National AAU Championships. I got 6th place they put me in the 6 mile again. It's like I said, it made, only because I'd got second the year before, it really made no sense I should be running 6 miles 10K, being a sub 4 minute miler. It just didn't make sense. And
whose decision was
it?
It
was Moobury's. Chaplin was against that. He said Riley should be running the 3. You should have him in the 3, but they're like, well, he got second the year before.
Was that in Miami?
No, it was actually in Des Moines my senior year. Another one of those hot races. I ran a PR. I ran 28:44 off of 35 miles a week because I was really doing a lot of hard speed work, interval work, running with the 800 guys, running with Art Sandison. And, I wasn't disappointed entirely, but I was like, it just didn't feel comfortable. I've been so used to running so fast because I was running mile races all spring, to jump into a 6 mile and go, it feels like I'm jogging, except I'm just getting more and more tired. So I entered the 3 mile at the AAU Championships in Bakersfield. And in that race was Shorter and Pre and Lindgren, Batchelor, Gary Bjorklund, Terry Harrison, all the best 3 milers in the country. And I'd only run, a time trial or something. I hadn't really run anything special. And we got in that race. They were running at about 9:30 at night at Bakersfield. I loved running in the lights. I'd run as a junior, gone down there in high school and ran 14:06 for 3 miles, and loved running there. And I just got in the pack, did the follow these guys, don't lead, stay behind them. Settled into the end of the string there, and pace stayed pretty slow. Started picking up with 2 laps to go. Really picked up, about a 62. And as we came around to the bell, Lindgren took off, and then Shorter went after him, and I think Pre and Batchelor followed. I kind of got caught a little bit, caught sleeping, and on the backstretch took off, and I started passing people. I passed 3 or 4 guys on the curve. I passed Pre on the curve. I passed Batchelor coming out of the straightaway. I passed Lindgren going down the straight, and didn't quite catch Frank, and lost by 2/10. And
was that when Pre was just graduating from high school?
No, he was a freshman.
He was a freshman at Oregon.
He was a freshman at Oregon. He had won the NCAA championship.
So you beat him in that race?
I did. He had just won the NCAA in 13:22, had beaten Berkeley and Bjorklund. I ran a 54-second last lap. Kind of confirmed Chaplin's prediction that I should have been running 3 miles, 5K. What do we got him in this other race for? But, I was an All-American cross country. I'd run a second in the nationals on the track in the thing. I'm not saying I wasn't a decent 6-mile 10K guy. When I was 30, I ran 29:10 for it. But it was, I think, just a big mileage base that I had. I could run anything they asked me to do, But it was probably too long for me. My ideal distance was somewhere between a mile and 5,000,
What was it like going back to high school, and you ran 8:48, national high school record, before, and then Pre would beat that 3 years later. What did that do? I mean, what was it like with the press and life at home? I mean, did it change you in any way? Because, there were headlines all over America.
I would say it didn't change me. I have clippings everywhere from Alaska to wherever when I broke that record. I didn't feel like it was. I don't think I ever appreciated how fast all that stuff was. I was. I'd kind of wake up early in the morning and say to myself, "Did I really do that? Did I really do that?" And literally, there wasn't every other day in either the Chronicle or the Spokesman Review, there was an article or my name or.
And you already committed to go to
WSU. Yeah, I'd committed to go to WSU. There was a lot of pressure going to WSU following in Lindgren's footsteps because of his success and the expectation that I was going to do exactly the same thing that he had done. And I always felt like, as we've just said, I was running the races I probably shouldn't have been running. I think that if I had to do a do-over on it, I should have been running the mile most of the time and then moving into the 5,000 when we got to the national level. It was, but the pressure was enormous when I got to college. It was enormous. My sophomore year, start of it, I was sick. I had colds, flu, or whatever, and a writer in the school paper, the Evergreen, basically called me out, saying that this hotshot sophomore from Spokane was getting all the press, and guys like Sanderson, who were walk-ons, partial scholarship dudes, were not getting a lot of attention, and they were doing a lot better. I sat down in the locker room and cried. I was like, no one has ever criticized me for doing my best, and I'm doing my best. And what was interesting about the response, because this is my character, I was not in great shape. Our first meet was against Stanford. Greg Brock, who was an All-American, good runner, good 10K guy, All-American cross country. He and I had a terrific duel at 2 miles. And I held him off and won that race. In my first collegiate race ever. And walked to the backside of the track and puked my guts out. But I said, listen, you can point me out if you want, but I'm better than this, and I'm going to show you that I'm better than this. But it was hard. It was very hard. Tough transition.
Was Jerry Lindgren at Washington State then with you?
He was. My freshman year, Jerry and I shared a room. And the interesting thing is, he and I didn't train that much together. I didn't, other than seeing him, in the dining room. We ate at the same table and everything else, and occasionally went for a run. I never saw him do. He was training, but it was just like, when did he do it and what did he do?
That's Jerry Lindgren.
That was Jerry. I mean, I don't know when. I mean, once in a while we would run and it would become too competitive and we'd accuse each other of picking the pace up and yada, yada, yada. We once ran from Pullman to Colfax. I blistered my feet really bad. And then we hitchhiked home, the two of us. We did a workout that was absurdly stupid where we ran 30 times 400, 440, picking the pace up. We did 3 sets of 10, and we'd pick up each set. We started out about 66, then we ran 64s, and we finished off in about 62s or 3s. And Mooberry just shook his head on the side. He goes, "What is wrong with these guys?" And Jerry ran a great race the next week, but I wasn't strong enough, and I had a terrible one. And I said, well, it'll pay off down the road. But, he just kind of did his own thing. I mean, I ran with some of the other guys, the younger guys. Sanderson and I ran a lot together. But, there is, to be honest, there is the Jerry Lindgren that we heard about training for the Olympics. And the Jerry Lindgren at Washington State, to me, was a mystery. He was, I don't think he ran huge amounts of miles that he is credited with when he was there. I think he ran smarter, to be honest. When he got out of Washington State, he tried to do that same level of training and got hurt all the time. I feel like everyone has this well of energy, and you can use that when you're 17 or 18 or 19, or you can use it when you're 25 or 28, like maybe the Europeans. But you're going to use it up. You're just going to use it up. It's not going to last forever. And I saw it happen to Jerry. I saw it happen to Ryan. Certainly tragically did not live long enough to find out, but I think he was smarter. I think he'd have been a great 10K guy. But, Shorter was very lucky. He wasn't hurt for a long time in his career, and then he suffered a foot injury. But it's, as much success as I experienced, and I loved every minute. I love to train. I still love to run. I mean, I don't run nearly as I used to, but I love the sensation of going out and training, and I love pushing myself, which I still do, and I love that challenge. But I will say, high school guys running 100 miles a week is crazy. Bodies are not ready for it.
What was your mileage in high school?
I averaged close to 100 miles a week my senior year. I ran 92 miles a week for 52 weeks. I tapered off before the state meet, and that was a 72-mile week. I mean, that's the mileage I should have been running all the time rather than tapering.
Was everybody kind of caught up in that? Lindgren, Ryan?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, everybody was caught up in that. And, Ryan was running these 100-mile base miles and then running 30 quarters and 40 quarters and, 10 times 1 mile. And, people got caught up in that, and, everybody's different. I mean, a guy that lives in my neighborhood, and he was a guy that you'd be like, the good high school miler, that's 440, 445. They had those guys running 100 miles a week. You remember our old friend Tom Hawk. Tom
Robinson.
Hawk's best mile, I think, was 4:36, and he ran 9:40, but he ran a 2:22 marathon. And he was running those kinds of miles with us, and guys of really, a big heart, but limited physical ability. And, Jerry and I were freaks. I look back at that, and it caught up with me. It seriously caught up with me. And what I found worked better after that was about 80 miles a week for me. That was a comfortable
So your sweet
level.
spot, 80 miles a week.
Yeah, about 80. About 80.
What was it like, or do you remember watching Lindgren in high school when you were a sophomore?
Right. It was incredibly inspiring. He was really little, for one. He's about 5'5" and a half, 118 pounds. And he'd take off like a rocket and just keep on going. his running style. I mean, he had a real quick turnover. I mean, amazingly fast turnover. And it just looked like the guy was running all out the whole way. And he never slowed down. I mean, it was like he'd take off at the start. And, I would say I modeled that whole tactic. I mean, I thought I'm going to go real fast in the beginning. If you can stay with me, good luck, because I know how to suffer. I mean, I can go through the pain. I used to say the reason I trained so damn hard is I didn't like to hurt. The more I trained, the less it hurt. But it was incredibly inspiring. I mean, when he was running those fast times indoors, his coach Tracy Walters, broadcast those on local radio. I mean, here when we're talking low tech, my dad and I would sit in the car. My dad was like a muscle car guy. He had GTOs, and we'd go out someplace where you got good radio reception and turn the radio on and listen to Tracy. And Tracy, of course, Tracy's really an excitable guy, and he would get you really in the spirit of the race. And watching Lindgren run was an incredible experience. I mean,
do you remember the LA Coliseum when Jerry ran against the Russians?
Yes.
You watched it on TV?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your memory?
The Russian dual meet historically was an absolute worldwide, world-class clash, a political clash, as well as a clash of athletic titans. I mean, the Russians had the best, some of the best athletes in the world, high jumpers. Their distance runners in the 1960 Olympics, Bolitnikov won the 10,000 in 56. Vladimir Kutz won the 5 and the 10. Crushed the Brits, with their style of running. They were the guys that set the tone for running in the winter. They'd bundle up and do long runs in the winter. And the Russians were looked upon as like Iron Men. I mean, they were real men, 28, 30-year-old men who served in the Russian army. And, the Soviet Union was at that time, the America's greatest enemy. The Cold War was not a shooting war, but, always the threat, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and stuff like that. I lived through that stuff, and it was scary. I mean, you never knew at any point in time if somebody was going to push the buttons and we were going to be in nuclear war. And so the meet against the Soviet Union, against the Russians, was looked upon as, the power and freedom of America against, the Iron Fist and communist-dominated Russia. And when Lindgren stepped up to the line, I mean, first of all, he was about half the size of these guys. And second, it was hot. 100,000 people there. Bobby Kennedy was there. And, he basically fell in these guys' shadow. They were setting the pace. They were running the pace. And I think at about 4 miles, somewhere in there, 4 miles, maybe 18 laps, somewhere in there, he threw in a 60-second lap. It's crazy. I don't know if he trained to do that or if he just, instinctively said, we'll see what these guys have. And they just gradually started dropping back and dropping back and dropping back. And, when he was, I think Sam Bell was a team coach at that point in time. And Sam Bell was a great coach at Oregon State. Jerry misunderstood him, as from what I understand. Bell was kind of going crazy on the inside of the track, and Jerry thought they were gaining on him, and he was trying to tell him he had like 150 meters on him. And ran away with it. I mean, literally at the time might have been the greatest victory accomplishment in American sport. We've kind of forgotten that, but that was, it was an incredible, incredible feat. And you just don't have in today's world. That would be like an 18-year-old Kobe Bryant or LeBron James playing in the NBA championships and scoring 50 points.
What was it? Do you remember it all? I know you were only a sophomore in high school, but Do you remember what Spokane was like when he returned, or was there any celebration?
I'm not sure. I think there was, I mean,
Because if it was New York City, you'd have a ticker.
yeah, you have a ticker
Right.
tape parade. There wasn't a parade or anything, but I mean, he was definitely celebrated by the family fathers. The mayor, and TV was crazy. I mean, you only had 3 television stations, black and white, when you could get them. But it was what was really such a fantastic thing, and it's kind of kind of the unspoken part of this is we had some great writers, great sports writers that loved track and field. And there was Bob Payne, who wrote for the Review, Merle Derrick, who wrote for the Chronicle, Harry Missildine, who was an old style newspaper dude. And these guys wrote about us. They let Spokane know how good Lindgren was, and later how good I was, and how my marks were holding, what they were like at a national level. I mean, it's interesting to this day. I'll encounter people and they'll go, "What's your last name?" I wear just Rick at work, REI, and they'll say, "What's your last name?" And, "Oh, I remember you." And we were household names, and Lindgren started that, of course, not me. Lindgren started that. I always knew that I kind of reached the same kind of level when I was out on a run and some kid yelled at me, "Who do you think you are, Jerry Lindgren?" And I was like, well, I'm trying to be that right now. But Lindgren was definitely very recognizable. People would see him. He'd run the bus routes. A guy told me one time, I saw this kid running, this little guy running, and he had a transistor radio right here by his ear. I said, well, that was Lindgren. And Spokane was not as big as it is now. And of course, we didn't have the Zags, who
Right.
everyone's in love with, which they should be. Man, we're huge Zag fans. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And Jerry continued that success in college. He ran. The only person that ever beat him in a collegiate race was Jim Ryan, beat him indoors at 2 miles. He won 11 NCAA championships, and he could not run as a freshman.
And you came in and became the second, in my opinion, if you had to say the 2 most iconic distance runners in Washington State history, it's Jerry Lindgren and Rick Riley.
Well,
8:48
Yeah.
in Pullman, Washington. You don't run 8:48 in Pullman, Washington. You got to go sea level, under the lights. You may have said it wasn't super hot and it wasn't very windy, which is very unusual
Right.
for Palouse. But that mark, I bet Steve Prefontaine back in Coos Bay looked at you like you looked at Lindgren, although he knew Lindgren too, obviously.
Of course.
And said, "I want to go chase that mark." What's your memories of Steve Prefontaine?
Well, of course, there was always 2 Pre's in my mind. Now, I called Pre. I mean, we knew that Steve was going to go to Oregon, just like I think the Oregon people knew I was going to go to Washington State. But you do it as a courtesy. It's almost a courtesy to the university to say, we'd like to invite you to come down and, whatever. So I called Pre and talked to him, and he pretty much said, I'm going to go to Oregon. But he told me on the phone he was going to break my record. He just flat said he was going to. And I said, well, cool. Good luck. No hard feelings. I mean, you're right. Running 8:48 in Pullman, anywhere else I probably would have run 8:42, whatever, but that's what it was. But, my memories of Pre, I was on the national team with him in 1970 after that AAU race. Pre and Shorter and I and Gary Bjorkland, Steve Savage. Steve Savage and I, the Steeplechase Oregon, were best buddies. I mean, we hung out all through that whole European tour. And, Steve, the Steve that you saw in private was different than the Steve standing on the track in front of his people and talking to the press. Basically when a reporter came up to Steve, that a light went on, and Steve basically became more brash, outspoken. And it wasn't that he was trying to be arrogant or anything. He just believed in what he could do. He's just going to tell you what he could do, and I think that's great. I mean, if that's what your personality is like, fine. I thought it was great. But as one-on-one with Steve, he's a quiet guy, just a guy.
Did he ever talk to you about? I mean, you were an 8:48 national high school record. He was an 8:43, I believe, national high school record. Did he ever bring that up, like the respect factor, or he just kind of?
Nah, it was just like we were buddies. It's like we're friends. We do the work. We know what it's like. We've trained hard. We race hard. I ran some workouts with him in New York. We ran road runs together, different things like that. I think it was just mutual respect.
So when he passed away in 1975, where were you and how were you impacted?
Emotional. I had heard it, and I was driving out to work. I taught school at Medical Lake, and I just couldn't believe it. I just said, this is not true. And, out of mutual respect and, knowing that, we're a brotherhood, it was crushing. I was only 2 years younger than him, but people aren't supposed to die young like that. That's not supposed to happen. And I wrote a tribute for the paper about Pre, but I can tell you, I vividly remember that day. I mean, I read the results in the paper, and then as I'm going to work, I'm listening to the news that he had been killed that night after the meet, and it was devastating.
Yeah, it's like a member of your family.
Yeah,
your brother.
Like your brother. I mean, like I said, it was, you always have, there's rivalries, and, you want to beat a guy when you stand on the track beside him. But, when it was all said and done, we'd drink beer. I loved running against the Brits and the Aussies and the Irish guys, because it was, race was over, you go have a beer together. And Pre was the same kind of guy, he was a kid. Just a kid. And it was just such a, talent that you were never going to see. It was, his fourth place Olympic finish in 1972. I mean, nobody ran harder in that race. I don't think he ran a smart race, to be honest. I think he should have had a medal, and he probably would have said the same thing. And I think both Bills would have said the same thing. But he did what he was going to do. That was Pre. He was going to leave every ounce of his strength and resolve on that track. And if they beat him, by God, they beat him. And I think any person who dies at whatever age, but particularly young people, it's just, you always just say what might have been. Was there a gold medal out there for him somewhere? Was a gold medal in the 10? Was a gold medal in the 5? There certainly were world records there waiting. I mean, he could have run those at any point in time he wanted to. But it was, when you know somebody as you did, of course, Pre, and I did on a personal level, he just wasn't a face and a name. I ran against him lots of times. I had the pleasure and the distinct, I caught him on a bad day, is the way I always got to beat him. But, that not very many people can say that they beat Steve Prefontaine, and I can say that. But I say it out of great respect. And it was sad. It's very, very sad, terribly sad.
As we get ready to close off our interview, it's Jerry Lindgren, it's Rick Riley, it's Steve Prefontaine. you guys were the role models for all the high school kids in America, and particularly in the Northwest. Mm-hmm. Iconic. I hope you know that. I mean, just you were my idol as a high school kid, and I loved coming over to Spokane. I love the way your family embraced me, and you sending me your journals for me to read. And I always send them back. I think there's somebody who probably got your last journal and never sent it back. And to see what you did and sending letters to me from when you were in a dorm at WSU, like that is, I mean, that people don't do that. Pre did that. I don't know if Jerry Lindgren would do that. They probably wouldn't pay for a stamp. But
I don't know if he had the money. Well, Jerry was a very gracious guy. He gave me shoes. He gave me uniforms. His background and mine were so different, and as he had the ability to overcome some of those things. I always felt like Ron Clark was one of my idols. Ron Clark from Australia, the great world record holder. And he sent me his shirt that he wore in the Commonwealth versus U.S., and he sent me an autographed book. And I always felt like we needed to pay back.
Yep.
Payback.
That's who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in my coaching, the kids are, every day.
Tell everybody where you're coaching.
Well, I coach at St. George's School. We've been extremely successful. I've won a state championship in track. I've only 1 year of coaching. And it was my first year that we haven't won a state trophy. And my goal is to win the state cross country championship. But the kids love the celebrity. The kids love it. And one of the things that I always like as a coach is to let the kids know I'm never going to have them do something that I wouldn't do myself. And that, they have great respect for that, for what I had done in high school. And they always used to say, well, how did you do that? And I said, yeah, I got dropped off by a spaceship, man. I don't know. I have no idea how I did it. But, it's, I just feel like athletes, and that's old school. I know it's old school, but I feel like athletes have an obligation. Kids look up to athletes. I know Barkley, the great basketball player, said, I'm not a role model. Well, maybe you're not. But I always felt like the people that I admired were very kind and gracious to me. And that I always felt like that's something that the public always treated me wonderful. Washington State gave me an opportunity, and I took advantage of that. The community always embraced me. And I feel like that athletes still have that obligation. And I know athletes do a lot of things that we don't see. They visit hospitals. They do clinics for kids. They do one-on-one things. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need, we're so cynical as a country. And I think sometimes we need to know that some of us who have been blessed with success and blessed with, the kind of talent that I have, that it's okay to give back. Some athletes refuse to sign autographs. I'm not that guy, not that many people ask for it anymore, but still, that's not something that I ever shied away from. Or if someone asked me to speak or whatever, to this day, I'm the first guy there. I feel like that is just an unspoken responsibility that we should have as athletes. And it's all it is time. Doesn't cost me a thing to do these things. All it is time. And you know what? I'd much rather leave this earth where people would say that guy was a hell of a nice guy. He was a nice guy. So that's just my personal philosophy.
I think that's a great way to end this podcast. And again, we want to thank Rick Riley, not only a legendary runner, but he's also a wonderful person. Maybe that's more important. Giving back to the sport. Coaches here at St. George's Academy here in Spokane. I don't think he's ever going to retire. I think he's going to go down with a ship like I am. But wow, what a great opportunity to hear your story. And we want to thank you for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for asking me. Thank you.
And thank you.